Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wooden Boat Build. As you remember on the last episode, I had some troubles with the fiberglassing. Structurally, the fiberglass is just fine, but it caused a bunch of drip marks. After talking to my buddy Grant, after the second coat, he's a boat builder and you'll remember that he was on my first video. He suggested I stop after that second coat, let it dry, and try sanding some of those areas to see if they would disappear. So the top had 3 coats, but the sides still only had 2 coats. So to get better light, I put the boat on some casters and rolled it into the driveway and started sanding. It was obvious right away that the little sanding wasn't going to fix the problem. And in the last video, a lot of people suggested that I sand all the way back through the fiberglass into the wood to remove those strip marks and then reapply the fiberglass. Well, the reason I didn't do that was because when I initially got the okumi plywood, I laid it out in the sun for like a full 8 hours and it really darkened and add some beautiful color to that okumi. Okumi initially is really light and almost pink in color. It's a lot like cherry, and it also ages like cherry and darkens beautifully from UV rays. So if I sanded those drip areas away, I'd have a bunch of those light colored blotches and that mist-colored bright pinkish wood next to those darker, the rest of it, which is a darker, nice tanned look. So I could try to leave the boat out in the sun again after I did that sanding and hope that that fresh wood would darken and then blend with the already aged wood, but maybe it wouldn't, and then it definitely would look a lot worse. Then eventually you add a lot of coats of marine varnish that have UV blockers in it, so after the boat is finished, it basically will remain whatever color it was before varnishing because of those UV blockers. And yes, over time it still would age some from that UV. It's impossible to block it all, but again, who knows if they would have blended back together. And I just really didn't want to spend days to sand the entire boat down and start from scratch. So you'll see in the next video my solution to the drips, and I'm actually really happy that they did happen and forced me into this fix. All right, I got the other side and the back all sanded, but I wanted to lay out the shape of the boat on this side. I just couldn't help myself. So I grabbed my oak batten and I stretched it across there and clamped it into the shape that I want. And I want this kind of sweeping look. The lines, I think, look really, really nice, like Jason Cajun's boat. He makes drift boats. I linked to his and show some pictures in the very, very first episode of this series. And it serves some other purposes besides just looks as well. You want your oar locks a certain height that makes it comfortable to row. You know, you want the oars out of the water a certain distance, so when they enter the water, they're at a particular angle, and when you're seating at a comfortable height, all that kind of stuff you kind of have to fine tune. I'm pretty sure that I need to have my oar locks sticking out of the water or on the side of the boat at about 26 inches. So that's where I have the top of that, but I want to reduce the rest of the boat, so that's why I'm cutting away some of that. For one, it removes material and weight, and other reason is that it reduces its wind footprint, essentially. So there's less material sticking out of the water that the wind will grab and move it around. So that'll help a little bit. So I'm going to trace out the line. I like this line right now, and then I'm going to measure, and then I'll transfer that to the other side. Definitely the type of day I've been having. So because I didn't add my third coat of epoxy while the epoxy was still tacky, I had to sand the entire boat again before applying. It took so long, and I also had to change paper about every 2 frame members worth of sanding. Epoxy is a complete pain in the butt to sand. So I sanded the one side and then realized that I could really reduce the amount of sanding I needed to do if I cut the shape out on the other side first. So that's why I didn't sand the second side first before cutting out the shape. Because I still had to add at least one more coat of epoxy, I decided to take the opportunity and beef up the transom a little bit more by adding some more fiberglass to those joints. And so I'm wiping down that section with denatured alcohol to make sure it's nice and clean. You always want to do that before you add any epoxy to any new section. And this is a really nice tip that my buddy Grant showed me. You take a chip brush and you jam the bristles into some tape and it'll help pull out those loose bristles. And then you can also take some CA glue right at the base of the bristles and then cure those, and that'll prevent any of those bristles from coming out when you're painting on your epoxy, because they definitely will with those chip brushes. And this is just some accelerator for CA glue. So now I'm just pre-wetting the area that I'm going to put the new fiberglass on before I put it over top, and then finish soaking the fibers with some flow coats over top. After the flow coat over the fiberglass gets tacky, I take some more Total Boat high performance epoxy and roll another coat over the entire boat. To get really good even coverage, it's a really good idea to roll one way, then the other way, and do that back and forth even a couple times to ensure you get really nice even coverage and you don't end up with drip marks or anything like that. The more even your coverage is, the easier it is to sand everything smooth to later varnish or paint. So it's really helps yourself in sanding if you get a nice even coat. Hey everybody, so sanding this boat has been an absolute bear. I've been using this DeWalt random orbital sander, and I also have a Bosch one over there, and just burning through paper, and it's taken forever. It took me probably an entire 6 to 8 hours to sand the whole entire hull after the initial epoxy over the fiberglass. So I was at it again today. I added some more epoxy, and I was at it again today. And I was like, you know what? There's got to be a better sander out there. And I knew about Festool and have heard a lot of good things. You know, they're really expensive, super expensive. So I went down to Johnson's where I had some in-store credit still. And after talking to them and one of my buddies that's local that has one of these, and they really had a lot of nice things to say about it. So I pulled the trigger on the 6-inch Rotex. You can see they have a ton of holes, and actually what happens is some of those holes is air coming in, it pushes air in, and some of the bigger holes are the vacuum. So the air going in keeps what you're sanding cool, which is going to be especially important on the epoxy, because when you're sanding and the epoxy, it heats up, and when it gets hot, it kind of gums up the sandpaper. So keeping it cool, and then also flushes the paper, so your paper supposedly lasts longer, will cut better because you have air going in, and then the high-powered vacuum over there pulling all the sand out of the sander and paper. So we're going to give it a shot. Another cool thing that I really like about this is that you can plug the sander into that, I think they call them dust extractors. I'm not really sure the Festool stuff. I don't have any other Festool things. I know they're real. People that are into Festool know everything about them. They're crazy, complicated things. So When you turn it on, when it's plugged in, it automatically will turn your vacuum on. And then the vacuum stays on for a couple seconds after you're done using it to finish pulling dust out of the hose and everything, and then it turns automatically off, which is awesome. It has a couple settings. It has your regular setting, and then it has a more aggressive setting. So I'm going to want to try this aggressive setting. I have 80 grit sandpaper and see if I can really cut this down, the time down on sanding this. So I'll show you guys what I figure out. Let's give this a shot. Bring this over here. Let's start on the lighter setting. Try the heavier setting. Wow. So the heavier setting on these sanders is actually a gear drive. Unlike the regular orbital sanders like my Bosch and the DeWalt, and also the regular orbital setting on this sander, if you push those sanders down hard enough, you'll know that they stop spinning and stop cutting well. Well, with the gear setting on this, no matter how hard you push, the thing still spins. It just removes material like crazy. It's right up there with the aggressiveness of a belt sander, but you have a lot more control, and it remains nice and flat because of that big flat disc. Okay, yes, that cuts really good. I think there's some other brands of sanders out there that have aggressive power like this. I've heard Makita has something, and then there's some other brands that also have the dust extractors and stuff like that. And I think this type of sander is absolutely awesome for jobs like this, or maybe sanding big tabletops. But it's really kind of cumbersome, and because it's so big and powerful, it can really be hard to handle sometimes. It really wants to jump around if you're not holding it just right. It probably won't be my first choice for finish sanding, and definitely not for sanding any intricate areas, but it's super impressive on large areas and heavy sanding, and honestly, the dust control is the best I've seen on any tool. Anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.